Transactions and databases. What is a transaction? A transaction is usually a collection of queries that we execute. In the beginning of the collection of the queries, we tell the database, we write begin, then the collection of the queries, and then we finish it either with commit or rollback. However, transactions is not necessarily a collection of queries, meaning even if we just type a query to a database and we don't specify any begin or commit or rollback, the database will implicitly start a transaction, run our query, and commit it or rollback. When we said that we write begin at the beginning of the transaction and commit at the end of the transaction, this is an explicit manual transaction start and stop. However, the computer, the database, if it has an error, some crash in the middle, it had better do automatic rollback. So a rollback may be committed by us. However, it may also be executed by the database in case it had an error. So it wants to roll back the set of queries that we run. So the database is always running a transaction. It can be the user, us, who write the begin and the commit or rollback, or it can be the database for automatic transactions. The transaction gives us an isolated running of our queries. So it's not necessarily that we run a set of update queries in a transaction, meaning it's also useful to run read queries in a transaction. Let's say that we create a report from the database. So we want an isolated snapshot of the database to create the report. Otherwise, the database would be kept updated and our report would not be consistent. Of course, there is a trade-off in between the availability of the report, the performance, how much time we want it to take, and whether we want to run all these read queries in transaction. But if we want to have a strict report for a specific snapshot of time, then read queries in a transaction also make sense. So it's not necessarily only write and changes that are executed under transactions. And what if a crash happens during a commit? Oh, this can be a very difficult and very hard thing for the database to accomplish. This is why we use databases, because we want also these extreme cases of a crash during a commit to be able to be handled correctly by the database. So it should remember that it was in the middle of the transaction. So the basic structure of a transaction is one, begin. We tell the database we begin the transaction, then either a commit or a rollback. This is the user, us, or if something unexpected happened, then we expect the database to perform an automatic rollback. Let's say that we move the canonical example is moving money from account 1 to account 2. Then we do begin, start the transaction. We check, we do a select, read on how much money he has, the account A. Then we deduct the money from account N. This is an update. Then we add the money to account B. And then we do the commit. So this whole thing was isolated in a specific transaction. As we said, 1 begin, 2 set of queries, 3 end. And the end can be either a commit or a rollback. So to sum it up, a transaction is a collection, a set of SQL queries that we run. So this collection of SQL queries are being run as one unit. So it's like we ran a single SQL query, only we run a collection of SQL queries, and they're all being run as a single SQL query, and we can have 10,000 queries in transaction, 20,000 queries in a transaction. Once we wrap them with begin and commit or begin. And eventually, if we had some error in the middle, then we want to roll back, then this is a transaction and it's being run as one specific query, self-encapsulated.